My name is Mildred Sterling, and for 34 years I was the cracked porcelain doll in a family of iron statues. In the Sterling dynasty, a lineage of real estate moguls and venture capitalists that stretched back to the industrial boom of the 1890s, illness was not seen as a misfortune. It was viewed as a character flaw, a lack of discipline. My father, Reginald Sterling, possessed a chest full of medals from boardroom wars and a heart that pumped ice water. My mother, Bernice, was a woman who treated her children like investments. My sister, Lorraine, was the high-yield bond, vibrant and profitable. I was the depreciating asset, the one kept in the back of the portfolio, quiet and unseen. The diagnosis came on a Tuesday in late March. I had fainted during a charity auction at the Metropolitan Club, an embarrassment that my mother remedied by telling the gathered socialites I was merely overwhelmed by the generosity in the room. The truth was far less poetic. My mitral valve was failing. The cardiologist, a grave man named Dr. Henderson, who spoke in hushed tones, told us that the defect was severe. Without immediate open-heart surgery, my heart would simply stop beating within the month. We sat in my father's study afterward. The room smelled of aged scotch and lemon polish. Reginald sat behind his mahogany desk, not looking at me, but at his calendar. "Thursday is impossible," he said, tapping a fountain pen against the leather desk pad. "Absolutely out of the question." "Reginald, she needs the surgery," my mother said, though her voice lacked any maternal urgency. She was examining her manicure, frowning at a microscopic chip on her ring finger. "But Thursday is the garden gala." The Sterling Foundation's annual garden gala. It wasn't just a party, it was the cornerstone of our family's social dominance. It was where legislative favors were traded over caviar, where marriages were arranged between bites of lobster thermidor. This year was particularly crucial because Lorraine was set to announce her engagement to Congressman Albright's son. "I can't move the gala, Bernice," my father snapped. "The governor is coming. The Vanderbilts have already RSVP'd. If we aren't there to greet them, rumors will start. They'll say the business is failing. They'll say we're weak." I sat in the wingback chair, my hands folded in my lap. My chest felt tight, a physical reminder of the ticking clock inside my ribs. "I could do it Friday," I offered, my voice small. "I can wait one more day." Reginald finally looked at me. His eyes were the color of steel and just as hard. "Dr. Henderson said, immediate, Mildred. We cannot risk you collapsing and dying on the floor of the estate on Friday morning. It would be unsightly." "So Thursday it is," Bernice said, standing up and smoothing her skirt. "We'll have the driver take you to Mount Sinai at dawn. We'll attend the morning briefing with the surgeons, stay until you go under, and then we must head back to Newport for the preparations. We'll be back by the time you wake up." "But the surgery is 6 hours," I whispered. "What if something goes wrong?" "Nothing will go wrong," Reginald stated, as if he could command my physiology the way he commanded a boardroom. "You are a Sterling. You will survive. And we have responsibilities. Lorraine needs us. The foundation needs us. You aren't a child, Mildred. You don't need us holding your hand while you're unconscious." They framed it as a matter of logic. Of course they couldn't sit in a waiting room for 6 hours doing nothing. It was inefficient. It was a waste of human capital. I nodded because that is what I had been trained to do. I was the obedient, sickly daughter who tried not to be a burden. But that night I couldn't sleep. I walked through the silent hallways of our sprawling estate. I passed the portraits of my ancestors, stern-faced men and women who looked down on me with disapproval. I stopped in front of the door to the East Wing where my grandfather, Grandpa Arthur, lived. He was 92, confined to a wheelchair and largely ignored by my parents. They claimed his mind was gone, that he was senile and confused. They kept him tucked away, trotting him out only for Christmas photos. I knocked softly and entered. The room was dark, lit only by the embers of a dying fire. Grandpa Arthur was awake, sitting in his chair by the window, a heavy blanket over his legs. Is that you, Millie? His voice rasped dry as autumn leaves. It's me, Grandpa. I walked over and sat on the ottoman at his feet. I have to go to the hospital tomorrow. I know, he said. He reached out a trembling hand and patted my cheek. His fingers were cold, but his touch was the warmest thing I had felt in years. They're leaving you, aren't they? I looked down. They have the gala. It's important. Important? He scoffed, a sound like cracking wood. A party is important. A merger is important. Your life, Mildred, is essential. There is a difference. They said they'd be back when I wake up, I said, trying to convince myself as much as him. Grandpa Arthur leaned forward, his eyes catching the firelight. For a moment, the cloudiness of age seemed to vanish, replaced by a terrifying sharpness. Listen to me closely, child. Tomorrow you will see exactly who people are. Pain has a way of stripping away the masks. When you wake up, pay attention to who is in the chair. That is all that matters. I didn't understand him then. I kissed his forehead and went back to my room to pack my bag alone. I didn't know that while I was packing my silk pajamas and toiletries, my father was on the phone with his lawyer, ensuring that if I died on the table, my trust fund would transfer seamlessly to Lorraine before the fiscal quarter ended. The morning of the surgery was a study in contrasts. The sky over Manhattan was a bruised purple threatening rain, while the interior of the hospital was blindingly, aggressively white. The air smelled of antiseptic and cold fear. I lay on the gurney in the preoperative holding area, wearing a thin cotton gown that offered no warmth and no dignity. My heart fluttered in my chest, a frantic bird trapping itself against a cage of bone. Reginald and Bernice stood at the foot of the bed. They looked magnificent and entirely out of place. My father was wearing a bespoke tuxedo, the silk lapels catching the harsh fluorescent light. He checked his Patek Philippe watch every 30 seconds, a nervous tick that betrayed his impatience. My mother was in a silver gown draped in a shawl of mink, her hair coiffed into an immovable helmet of blonde perfection. She held a clutch purse against her chest like a shield. It's a standard procedure, Reginald said for the fourth time. He was speaking to the air, or perhaps to the heart monitor, rather than to me. Dr. Henderson is the best. I play golf with his brother. He knows who we are. He knows not to make mistakes. Of course, Reggie, Bernice chimed in, her eyes darting to the hallway where nurses bustled by. Mildred, stop shaking, dear. It makes you look hysterical. The doctors need to see that you have a strong constitution. I'm scared, Mother, I said, my voice trembling despite my best efforts. They're going to stop my heart. And then they'll start it again. She dismissed, adjusting her diamond earring. Technology is a marvel. Now remember, when you wake up, you'll be in the ICU. We might be a little late getting back from Newport. Traffic on the bridge can be horrendous on gala days, but we will be here. Lorraine sends her love, by the way. She's terribly busy with the florists, or she would have come. Lorraine hadn't visited me in 3 weeks. She was likely asleep at the hotel, saving her energy for the cameras. A nurse entered the cubicle. Her name tag read Beverly, and she had a face that spoke of long shifts and deep empathy. She took one look at me shivering on the bed and then looked at my parents in their evening wear. Her eyebrows knitted together in a frown she didn't try to hide. We're ready to take her back now, Beverly said softly, moving to the side of my bed. She placed a warm hand on my shoulder. Are you ready, honey? Wait, I said, panic rising in my throat. I reached out for my mother's hand. Bernice hesitated just a fraction of a second, but I saw it before taking my fingers in her gloved hand. She didn't squeeze back. She just held my hand like it was a dead fish she didn't want to touch. We have to go, Mildred, Reginald said, checking his watch again. The helicopter leaves the helipad in 20 minutes. If we miss the window, we miss the opening toast. Good luck, dear, Bernice said, pulling her hand away. She leaned down and kissed the air 3 inches above my forehead, so as not to smudge her lipstick. Be brave. We'll see you on the other side. And then they turned. They didn't look back. I watched the backs of them, the tuxedo and the silver gown, retreat down the sterile hallway. They walked with a brisk, purposeful stride, the stride of people who were escaping a burden. They didn't look like parents leaving a child. They looked like executives leaving a closing meeting. Are they coming with us to the anesthesia room? I asked Beverly, tears finally spilling over. Beverly looked at the empty doorway, her jaw tight. She grabbed a warm blanket from a warmer and tucked it around my chin. No, sweetie, it's just you and me now. But I'm not going anywhere. I'm going to be right here until you fall asleep holding your hand. As the orderly unlocked the wheels of the gurney and began to push me toward the double doors, I felt a coldness that had nothing to do with the temperature of the room. I realized that my parents hadn't just left me. They had discarded me. To them, this surgery was an interruption to their social calendar, a glitch in the programming of their perfect life. The lights passed overhead in a rhythmic blur. Click-clack, click-clack. The doors to the operating theater loomed ahead, marked with red letters, authorized personnel only. Count backward from 10, Mildred, the anesthesiologist said, placing a mask over my face. The smell of plastic and sweet gas filled my lungs. 10, I whispered. They left me. 9. They chose the party. 8. Grandpa was right. 7. I am alone. Darkness swallowed me whole, but the last image burned into my mind wasn't the face of the doctor or the lights. It was the back of my father's tuxedo disappearing around the corner, marching toward a world where money mattered more than blood. Waking up from open-heart surgery is not like waking up from sleep. It is a violent dragging claw toward consciousness. It felt as though I was swimming upward through a lake of molasses, my body heavy, my chest on fire. The first sound I heard was the rhythmic whoosh beep of a ventilator, a machine breathing for me because my body had forgotten how. I opened my eyes, but the world was a blur of aggressive shapes and lights. My throat was raw from the intubation tube that had just been removed. Pain radiated from my sternum, a deep, bone-crushing ache that made every shallow breath a labor of Hercules. I blinked, trying to clear the fog of anesthesia. Mildred, can you hear me? It was a nurse's voice. Not Beverly. Someone new. I tried to nod, but my head felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. I licked my dry lips and whispered a sound that was barely a croak. Mom. I turned my head to the right toward the visitor chairs that lined the wall of the ICU cubicle. I expected to see the silver gown. I expected to see Reginald pacing, checking his watch. I expected perhaps foolishly to see Lorraine holding a bouquet of get-well lilies. The chairs were empty. The vinyl cushions were smooth and undisturbed. No coats, no purses, no magazines. Just the sterile emptiness of a room where no one waits. I closed my eyes, a fresh wave of tears mixing with the grit in my eyelashes. They aren't here. The anesthesia had disoriented my sense of time. Maybe it had only been an hour. Maybe they were just in the cafeteria. What? Time, I rasped. The nurse checked the chart. It's 8:00 p.m., honey. You've been in recovery for about 4 hours since the surgery ended. 8:00 p.m. The surgery had started at 7 a.m. 13 hours. They had been gone for 13 hours. The gala would be in full swing now. The appetizers would be cleared, the main course served. My parents were likely clinking crystal glasses, laughing at a joke by the governor, while I lay here with a zipper of staples running down the center of my chest. A shadow moved in the corner of the room near the window, where the blinds were drawn against the city lights. I hadn't noticed it before because the figure was so still. They aren't coming, Millie. The voice was weak, but the tone was iron. I turned my head, slowly wincing at the pull of the IV lines. There, sitting in a wheelchair that looked far too utilitarian for a man of his stature, was Grandpa Arthur. He was wearing his old tweed jacket, the one that smelled of pipe tobacco and cedar, and a flat cap pulled low over his white hair. His hands, gnarled with arthritis, rested on a leather-bound ledger on his lap. "Grandpa," I choked out. How did you get here? I have my ways, he said, wheeling himself closer to the bed. The motor of his electric chair hummed softly. I paid the driver double what Reginald pays him. Told him if he took me to the hospital instead of the club, I'd make sure his son's college tuition was handled. Loyalty is a commodity, my dear. You just have to know the price. Where are they? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Arthur's face hardened. The lines around his mouth deepened into a scowl that could have terrified board members in 1975. Newport. The gala runs until midnight. Then there's the after-party at the yacht club. They called the nurses' station once at noon to ask if you were dead. When they heard you were stable, they said to tell you they'd visit on Sunday. Sunday. My mind reeled. Today is Thursday. Sunday is 3 days away. They have a golf tournament on Saturday, Arthur said, his voice dripping with disgust. And recovery is boring, according to your mother. The pain in my chest was suddenly eclipsed by a hollow ache in my soul. I looked at this old man, the patriarch who my parents claimed was too senile to manage his own affairs, too weak to leave his room. He had traveled 2 hours into the city, navigated a massive hospital system, and sat in a hard plastic chair for hours just so I wouldn't wake up alone. Why? I whispered. Because you are the only one of them worth a damn, Arthur said. He opened the leather ledger on his lap. It wasn't a business book. It was filled with handwriting. His handwriting scrawled dates and times and notes. And because it is time we stopped pretending, Mildred. I have been watching. I have been counting. And today they went too far. He tapped the page with a shaking finger. Rest now. Close your eyes. I'm not leaving. I'll be here when you wake up again. And when you are strong enough to read this, we are going to burn their house down. The next 2 days were a blur of morphine dreams and the steady, comforting presence of Grandpa Arthur. He refused to leave the room. He slept in the recliner, eating terrible hospital jello and terrorizing the nurses if they were late with my pain medication. He was a sentinel guarding the door against the ghosts of my family. On the morning of the 3rd day, the fog finally lifted. I was moved from the ICU to a private recovery suite. The pain was manageable now, a dull throb rather than a sharp scream. I sat up, propped by pillows, and looked at my grandfather. You look terrible, I said, a small smile touching my lips. I look like a man who has spent 3 days in a chair designed by a sadist. He grumbled, rubbing his lower back. But you, my dear, look like you survived. That is all that matters. He wheeled himself to the side of the bed and placed the leather ledger on my tray table. Open it. I hesitated. The book looked ancient, the leather worn smooth by decades of handling. I opened the cover. The first entry was dated from 1985. November 12, 1985. Mildred's 4th birthday. Reginald and Bernice absent. Claimed urgent trip to Zurich. Verified skiing in Aspen with the DuPonts. I turned the page. June 4, 1992. Mildred's elementary graduation. Parents absent. Bernice at spa in Sedona. Reginald playing poker in Atlantic City. October 14, 2005. Mildred hospitalized for pneumonia. Parents visited for 15 minutes. Left for dinner reservation at Le Bernardin. Page after page. Year after year. A meticulous catalog of abandonment. It wasn't just a diary. It was an indictment. It listed every soccer game missed, every school play, ignored every medical emergency, delegated to a nanny or a driver. What is this? I asked, my hands trembling as I traced the ink. I call it the ledger of priorities, Arthur said. Your parents think I am a senile old fool who stares out the window all day. They forget that I built this empire. I know how to keep records. I noticed early on that you were disposable to them. Lorraine was the trophy. You were the obligation. I knew they weren't around much, I said quietly. But seeing it written down, it's not just for sentimental reasons, Mildred. Arthur cut in, his eyes sharp. Turn to the back, the bookmark. I flipped to the marked page. Past the handwritten notes pasted into the book was a photocopy of a legal document. It was typed on old typewriter paper dated 1975. The Sterling Family Trust, Section 14B. Read the highlighted paragraph, Arthur commanded. I squinted at the small text. In the event that the primary beneficiaries, Reginald Sterling, demonstrate gross negligence in the care of a dependent heir during a life-threatening crisis, the directorship of the family foundation shall not pass to said beneficiary. Gross negligence is defined as the voluntary abandonment of a dependent during a critical medical or safety event for non-emergency reasons. In such a case, the stewardship bypasses the negligent party and vests immediately in the next competent blood relative. I looked at my breath catching. Dependent heir. But I'm 34. You are financially dependent on the trust, Arthur explained. And legally, due to your heart condition, you are classified under the medical dependency clause I wrote into the bylaws 40 years ago. I wrote it to protect myself in my old age, but the wording applies to any heir. He leaned in closer. They left you alone during open-heart surgery to go to a party, Mildred. They didn't just hurt your feelings, they violated the duty of care. They broke the trust. Does Dad know about this clause? Reginald never reads the fine print, hey, Arthur sneered. He assumes the money is his birthright. He thinks the trust is just a bank account. He doesn't understand that it's a contract he just breached. So what does this mean? I asked, looking at the frail old man who had suddenly become a giant. It means, Arthur said, a wicked glint in his eye, that as of Thursday morning when they walked out those doors they lost the company. They just don't know it yet. They arrived on Sunday afternoon, just as Grandpa Arthur had predicted. I had sent Grandpa home an hour earlier. He insisted on staying, but I needed him to be safe and I needed him to maintain his cover. If Reginald saw him here coherent and plotting, the element of surprise would be lost. So I sat alone in this private suite, the ledger hidden beneath my mattress, waiting for the performance to begin. The door swung open and Bernice swept in, bringing with her a cloud of Chanel No. 5 and the frantic energy of a woman trying to outrun her own conscience. Reginald followed, carrying a large gift bag from Tiffany's. Mildred, oh my brave girl, Bernice cried, rushing to the bedside. She leaned in to hug me but stopped inches away, mindful of the tubes and wires. Instead, she patted my shin through the blanket. You look tired but alive. We were so worried. Terrified, Reginald added, placing the blue bag on the table. Absolutely terrified. We called constantly. Didn't the nurses tell you? They said you called once. I said, keeping my voice neutral. I was practicing the art of the poker face, a skill I was realizing I had inherited from my grandfather, not my father. Nonsense, Reginald blustered, waving a hand. Hospital communication is notoriously bad. We were checking in every hour. But the traffic, Mildred, you have no idea. The bridge was closed. A tanker overturned. We were stuck in gridlock for hours. We tried to turn back, but we were trapped. And then the gala crisis. Bernice sighed, pulling a chair closer. The governor's wife had an allergic reaction to the crab cakes. It was chaos. We simply couldn't leave until the ambulances cleared. We were held hostage by etiquette, really. Lies. All of it. Grandpa Arthur had shown me the weather reports and traffic logs. The bridge had been clear. The governor's wife was in Europe. It's okay, I said, lying through my teeth. I slept through most of it anyway. See? Bernice looked at Reginald with relief. I told you she wouldn't mind. She understands duty. Reginald pushed the Tiffany bag toward me. Open it. A little welcome back token. I reached into the bag and pulled out a black velvet box. Inside lay a diamond tennis bracelet thick with stones. It must have cost $50,000. It was beautiful, cold, and heavy. It was a bribe, a shiny object to distract me from the fact that I had almost died alone. It's lovely, I said. Thank you. Only the best for our fighter, Reginald said, puffing out his chest. Now we can't stay long. We have a flight to the Hamptons in an hour. The summer season is starting and we need to open the house. But we've hired the best private nurses for you. You'll be discharged to the city apartment in a week. You'll have everything you need. Lorraine, I asked. Oh, she's in Milan, Bernice said vaguely. Wedding dress fittings, she sends her love. They stood up, the visit lasting a total of 12 minutes. As Bernice leaned in to kiss my cheek, I smelled it. Beneath the heavy perfume, there was the stale, sickly sweet scent of old champagne seeping through her pores. Her eyes were slightly bloodshot. They hadn't been stuck in traffic. They had been hung over. Rest up, Reginald said, checking his watch, the same gesture as before the surgery. We have a big announcement coming up in 2 months, the Victory Luncheon. We want you there. It's good PR to show the family is whole. I'll be there, I promised. Good girl, he said. They walked out, leaving me with a diamond bracelet I didn't want, and a burning resolve I had never felt before. They thought I was the same Mildred, weak, compliant, grateful for scraps. They didn't know that the Mildred who went into that surgery had died on the table. The woman who woke up was filled with Grandpa Arthur's steel, and she was ready to collect on the debt. 2 months later, the Sterling estate in Newport was a kaleidoscope of pastel silks and white linen. The Victory Luncheon was ostensibly to celebrate the Sterling Group's quarterly earnings and Lorraine's official engagement, but everyone knew it was really a display of power. It was a message to the market. We are rich, we are healthy, we are untouchable. I was the prop. I sat in a wheelchair on the bluestone patio, dressed in a soft pink dress that my mother had selected because it softened the harshness of my scar, which was hidden beneath the high neckline. I was thinner, my cheekbones sharper, but I was alive. My recovery had been brutal but solitary. My parents had visited twice. Grandpa Arthur had called every day. The guests swirled around me like sharks in loafers. The Vanderbilts, the Astors, the Titans of Wall Street. They patted my shoulder and murmured platitudes. So good to see you up. What a miracle. You look fragile, dear, don't overdo it. I smiled and nodded, playing the role of the invalid. Meanwhile, my eyes scanned the perimeter. Reginald held court near the champagne tower, his laugh booming across the lawn. He looked invincible, a king in his castle. Bernice was fluttering between tables, micromanaging the waiters. Lorraine was showing off her ring, a rock the size of a quail egg, to a group of jealous debutantes. And there, in the shadow of the pergola, sat Grandpa Arthur. He had been wheeled out by his nurse, looking frail and sleepy. Most guests ignored him. Reginald had told everyone that his father was having a bad day and didn't recognize anyone. It was the perfect cover. At 1:00 p.m., the crystal glasses were chimed with silver spoons. The crowd hushed. Reginald stepped up to the podium, a microphone in hand. The Atlantic Ocean glittered behind him, a backdrop that cost millions to secure. Friends, family, distinguished guests. Reginald began, his voice smooth as velvet. Thank you for joining us today. We have faced challenges this year. The markets have been volatile. My own daughter Mildred faced a terrible health scare. He gestured to me, a polite ripple of applause. I didn't wave. But the Sterlings do not break. Reginald continued, his voice rising. We endure. We sacrifice. When Mildred was in that hospital, Bernice and I were torn apart, keeping vigil, praying for her recovery, while also keeping this company afloat. It is that dedication to family and to business that defines us. He raised his glass. To the future, to Lorraine and her fiancé, and to the Sterling Foundation, which will remain in our family's capable hands for another 100 years. Hear, hear, the crowd shouted. Then a sound cut through the applause. A high-pitched screech of feedback. Scream! Everyone winced. Reginald frowned and tapped the microphone. But the sound wasn't coming from the podium, it was coming from the pergola. Grandpa Arthur had pulled a portable karaoke machine, God knows where he got it from, beneath his blanket. He held the microphone with a steady hand. He wheeled his chair forward, the crowd parting like the Red Sea. Dad. Reginald laughed nervously. Dad, let's get you back inside. The sun is too hot for you. The sun is fine, Reginald. Arthur's voice boomed, amplified by the cheap speaker. It wasn't the voice of a senile man. It was the voice of a prosecutor. But the lies. The lies are getting a bit thick for my taste. The silence that fell over the lawn was absolute. A seagull cried out overhead, the only sound daring to compete with the tension. Reginald's smile faltered, twitching at the corners. Dad, please. Reginald hissed, stepping down from the podium and walking toward him. You're confusing everyone. Let's go. I am not confused, Arthur said clearly. He reached into the side pocket of his wheelchair and pulled out a small black device, a digital voice recorder. I am clarifying. You just toasted to your vigil at Mildred's bedside. You spoke of sacrifice. Security help my father. Reginald signaled to two large men in suits near the perimeter. If anyone touches me, Arthur snapped, turning his gaze to the guards. I will have you arrested for assault on the elderly. I am a shareholder of this property. The guards hesitated. Arthur held up the recorder. This is a recording from the Vintner's Private Reserve tasting room in this very house. Timestamp Thursday, March 24th, 10:15 a.m., exactly the moment Mildred was being placed on a heart-lung bypass machine. He pressed play. The sound was tinny but unmistakable. The clinking of glasses, laughter, and then Bernice's voice loud and clear. Oh, stop looking at your phone, Reggie. If she dies, the doctors will call. Besides, Black is slimming on me, don't you think? Pour me another Pinot. Reginald's voice followed. It's an inconvenience, that's all. If she pulls through, she'll be whining for weeks. God, why couldn't she have been the healthy one like Lorraine? Arthur pressed stop. The crowd gasped. It wasn't a polite gasp. It was the sound of air being sucked out of the room by shock. Heads turned toward Bernice. She had gone pale beneath her bronzer, her hand clutching her throat. Lorraine took a step away from her parents, her eyes wide. That is doctored, Reginald shouted, his face turning a mottled red. Technology these days. Deep fakes. My father is unwell. He's being manipulated. I have the hospital visitor logs, too. Arthur continued, ignoring his son. He held up a sheaf of papers. Signed by the head nurse. Patient alone from 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. Parents absent. Grandfather present. He wheeled himself closer to the center of the patio. You left a dying girl to drink wine. You lied to the board. You lied to your friends. But worst of all, you lied to the trust. Reginald lunged forward, losing all composure. Give me those papers, old man, sir. Stand down, Reginald. The voice came from the back of the crowd. It was Mrs. Glenda Higgins, the family's chief legal counsel for 30 years. She was a woman of few words and immense power. She stepped forward wearing a navy suit that looked like armor. Glenda, tell him to stop this insanity, Guy, Reginald pleaded. I can't, Glenda said, walking past Reginald to stand beside Arthur. She looked at the guests, then at Reginald. Because under the provisions of the 1975 Estate Trust, Arthur is correct. He filed the evidence with my office this morning. Reginald froze. What provisions? I am the CEO. I am the trustee. Not anymore, Arthur said. His voice dropped an octave, solemn and final. The Guardian Clause, Reginald. Section 14B. Gross negligence in the care of a dependent heir. You abandoned Mildred during a life-threatening crisis for a social event. You triggered the forfeiture. That's archaic legalese, Reginald sputtered. You can't enforce that. It is the law, Glenda Higgins stated calmly. The trust was explicit. The stewardship of the Sterling assets requires moral competency. By abandoning Mildred to attend a party, and by lying about it to cover your tracks, you have proven yourself unfit. She reached into her briefcase and pulled out a blue folder. As of 9 a.m. this morning, the Board of Trustees has voted. Your power of attorney is revoked. Your access to the Foundation's accounts is suspended. You can't do this! Bernice shrieked, her poise shattering. We are the Sterlings who is going to run the company this geriatric. She pointed a trembling finger at Arthur. No, Arthur said softly. He looked at me. For the first time, all eyes turned to the wheelchair and the pink dress. The invalid, the quiet one, the cracked doll. The clause states, Glenda read, that the stewardship passes to the next competent blood relative. I slowly stood up. My legs were shaky and my chest ached, but I stood. I walked past my sister, who was looking at me with a mix of horror and calculation. I walked past my mother, who looked like she was seeing a ghost. I walked past my father, who looked small, suddenly so very small. I took the blue folder from Glenda. Hello, Father? I said. My voice was quiet, but in the silence of the garden it carried to the ocean. Mildred, Reginald whispered, sweat beading on his upper lip. Mildred, honey, put that down. This is a misunderstanding. We can talk about this inside. We're family. Yes, I said. We are. That's the problem. I turned to the guests. The elite of society were watching with bated breath. They loved a scandal, but they respected power more. And right now, the power was holding the blue folder. My parents, I addressed the crowd, chose to be here at a party rather than at the hospital. They made a business decision. Today, the trust has made a business decision in return. I looked at Reginald. You're fired. The words hung in the air, sharper than any guillotine. Reginald slumped as if his strings had been cut. Bernice let out a sob. But the room stopped cold. The music had stopped. The chatter had stopped. The only thing moving was the wind and the undeniable shift of the world tilting on its axis. The immediate aftermath was a flurry of legal confirmation. The lawyers present at the luncheon, and there were many, knew Glenda Higgins. They knew she didn't bluff. As the reality set in, the crowd physically shifted. People stepped away from Reginald and Bernice as if failure was contagious. Lorraine was the first to defect. She walked over to me, her face arranging itself into a mask of sisterly concern. Millie, she said, reaching for my arm. I had no idea. They told me you were fine. They told me not to come if I had known. I looked at her hand on my arm, then at her diamond engagement ring. You didn't call Lorraine, not once. You were busy. I was planning the wedding, she stammered. The wedding is still on, I said coldly. But the budget is going to be reviewed. The foundation will no longer be funding personal vanities. Lorraine snatched her hand back, her eyes narrowing. She realized then that the bank of Dad was closed and the bank of Mildred had very different interest rates. Reginald and Bernice were escorted inside by Glenda to sign the transition papers. They didn't fight, they were in shock. They had lived their lives believing that money made them immune to consequences. They never imagined that the rules they ignored were written by a man who valued loyalty over profit. I sat back down in my wheelchair, exhausted. Grandpa Arthur rolled up beside me. He didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He just placed his hand on mine. You did good, kid, he said. I feel sick, I admitted. They're still my parents. They are, he agreed, and you will take care of them. You won't throw them on the street like they would have done to you. You will give them a stipend. You will keep a roof over their heads, but you will never, ever let them hold the keys again. That evening the house was quiet. The staff moved in hushed whispers. Reginald and Bernice retreated to their wing of the house. I sat in the library looking at the blue folder. I was now the chairwoman of the Sterling Foundation. I controlled assets worth nearly $1 billion. But as I looked out the window at the moon reflecting on the ocean, I realized the real inheritance wasn't the money. It was the truth. I finally knew who loved me. And I finally knew that I was strong enough to survive without the people who didn't. It has been a year since the Red Wedding Luncheon, as the tabloids called it. Life at the Sterling estate has changed. The ostentatious galas have stopped. I sold the yacht. I repurposed the funds to launch a new wing at Mount Sinai Hospital dedicated to pediatric cardiology and affordable care for families who can't choose between a paycheck and their child's life. Reginald and Bernice still live here. They are quiet now. They attend the occasional dinner, but they do not speak of business. They have aged 10 years in the last 12 months. It is strange to see the titans of industry reduced to pensioners in their own home waiting for their monthly allowance check, which I sign. I do not starve them, but I do not indulge them. They have forced themselves to learn humility, a lesson that came decades too late. Lorraine married her politician, but without the unlimited Sterling dowry, the marriage is practical. She calls me once a week. We talk about the weather. We are polite. We are strangers who share DNA. Grandpa Arthur passed away 3 months ago. He died in his sleep in his own bed with me holding his hand. He left me everything in his personal will, including the leather ledger. I keep it on my desk at the foundation. I often think about that day in the hospital. The terror of the closing doors. The silence of the empty room. It was the worst day of my life, but it was also the day my life truly began. It was the fire that burned away the chaff and left only the steel. I am not the porcelain doll anymore. My scar is a silver line down my chest, a zipper that holds my heart inside. A heart that beats on its own rhythm, indebted to no one but the old man who sat in the chair when everyone else walked away. Sometimes people ask me if it was hard to take everything from my parents. I tell them the truth. I didn't take anything. I just stopped letting them take from me. If you are reading this, and you have ever felt like the afterthought in your own family, like the burden, like the one who doesn't measure up, listen to me. Your worth is not determined by who sits in the waiting room. It is determined by the beat of your own heart. You are stronger than they think. And one day you might just be the one holding the ledger. Enough is enough. Are you the Mildred Sterling of your family? Have you ever been left behind when you needed someone the most? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. My name is Mildred Sterling. Thank you for listening to my story.